Welcome to the Awakened Goddess Show, your source for inspiration, wisdom, and personal discovery. The place to learn from a diverse mix of mentors, metaphysical experts, spiritual leaders, and best-selling authors from around the world. I'm your host, Angela Wilkinson. Join me as I explore the minds of my masterful guests while they share powerful insights and easy-to-use tools you can start using right away. Now, let's tap into the energy of the Awakened Goddess and be enlightened by today's guest. Frances McGrath has had a lifelong fascination with optimizing health and well-being. Growing up in Australia and hearing of the advanced indigenous knowledge of herbal medicine from a mother who was a nurse, Frances' passion became helping people to claim and optimize their own health and well-being. Frances obtained a degree in health science, specializing in public health nutrition and epidemiology, followed by studies in sleep science, positive psychology, and theta healing. As a passionate feminist, Frances believes that equality and equity are important factors in well-being and health, and he currently offers health literacy education with a focus on skill building for parents. Now let's welcome Frances to the show. Hi, I'm Angela Wilkinson, and welcome to this episode of the Awakened Goddess Show, where we co-create powerful, conscious conversations on the leading edge. Today we're coming to you from Bath, England, and I'm really excited because Frances is joining me today. He's one half of the host and hostess team that are hosting me here in Bath. And so first off, thank you for having me in your home.
You're really welcome.
When I was, I'd say 16, I had this deep calling within to go to Australia and study with the Aborigines. I didn't. But so I want to hear your connection with Earth. You grew up there. I want to kind of see the world through your eyes.
Okay. All right. I grew up in a very mixed culture area. So there was a lot of European families came in the 50s and 60s. My family is assertively Irish. We're very, maybe not quite as bad as the Boston Irish, but pretty close from what I understand. And fortunately for me, while I was growing up, there's a lot of Indigenous people around. When my mum was growing up, there was Indigenous people around. So there was always Indigenous people around. And what was different for me was that when I was with white people, I couldn't talk about stuff that made sense to me. But when I was with Indigenous people, they would. So Australian First Peoples have been there. Well, the latest estimates are about 70,000 years.
Wow.
And I've personally heard people tell stories. And when you pull the stories apart, there are events that happened before the last ice age finished. So it's there's oral traditions that, as far as I can tell, are really scientifically accurate at least 8 to 12,000 years ago. And that sort of makes sense to me because they've been there so long that it's like their genes are wired into the land. And I've always thought of myself as not First People, but my family has been in Australia long enough that the land has started to get into my genes. So for me, it makes sense that you belong to a place. So when people are talking about, oh, I own this piece of land, it doesn't make sense for me. It's sort of you belong to a place, you belong to a people. And it always made sense for me that I belong to what Indigenous people call Terrebonne, what white people call Bundaberg. And it's all red soil country. And it just feels alive. So one of the things I love doing is just being barefoot on the rocks in the country I come from. It's like, it's a great pleasure. You can feel the land talking to you, and probably with nothing like the depth that Indigenous First People feel.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a real sense for me that everything's alive, but everything lives at a different speed. So, like, sort of, insects live really fast, you know, like their entire life is over in 48 hours. And then dogs and cats and cows and then humans, but then trees live for several hundred years. Rivers live for several thousand years. Rocks live for millions of years. It's all alive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's an old story about two butterflies sitting on a tree talking to each other, and they're sort of feeling the bark, and one of the butterflies says to the other butterfly, does anything seem different to you? And the second butterfly says, no, nothing's changed in my life. But they're only a day old, which seems like forever for them. But for a tree, it's just
a moment.
Yeah, it's too short a time to probably for the tree to even process.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like everything's alive, and everything has spirit. Yeah, another lump in the throat moment.
Oh, good. You know what? But I love that. I love that we're talking about something that really is deeply moving for you, because that you're sharing the essence of that energy.
Yeah.
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 So I'm curious, how did the goddess come into your life?
Oh. It's actually sort of funny. There was no girls in my family till I was about, do the math, about 7, I think, 6 or 7.
Yeah.
So I was sort of always, in a sense, a strange sort of sense, mum's oldest daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So I did housework. I helped around the house. I wasn't that comfortable with the strong masculinity. I didn't get along particularly well in the masculinity in Australia at that stage, and I always thought that was normal. But there was always voices in my head, that sort of, like, sometimes I feel like a tunable radio, but that's another story.
Yeah.
There was always this voice in my head that said that nurture, belonging was normal, and it should be normal for all people. And unfortunately, I was brought up in the Catholic tradition, and I still very much believe in the teachings of Christ rather than, like, being a church Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So I never really had an experience of what or who was talking to me, if that makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like, so as a Catholic, I was very attached to Marianism when I was in my teens, and sort of the Virgin Mary made sense to me. Like even God's got to have a mum.
Mm-hmm. Yes, my goddess gave birth to your God. I like that saying.
Yeah. And for me, I had always sort of thought that was the spirit of the land talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I do now make a distinction between places have spirit, land has spirit, rocks have spirit, trees have spirit. So it's, as I've got older, I've sort of teased it apart, and sort of I get that a mountain, a place, is just a life form like you and I, and it has a sense of self. It has a spirit, and we can be in communication with that spirit. And for me, there's even a sense to which I know that I belong to that spirit. It's what I am is deeply embedded in this. There's this great term that comes from Central Australia, First People, and it's, excuse me if I mispronounce this, it's called Karumpa. And it's a sense of belonging, but it's also that you're made up from the stuff around you. So with Karumpa, the land breathes out and the trees breathe in. So what the trees are made of is the exhalation of the land. And then the trees breathe out and the animals breathe in. So you and I are made from the exhalations of the trees. And then we breathe out and the land breathes in. So it's like, in opposition to the Western idea that we're all separate, it's like you are so integrally a part of the spirit, the play, the cycle, the breath of life, that the idea of owning something is just sort of bizarre. So it always felt to me when I was younger that the voices I was hearing was place. But as I got older, I started experiencing that what I really wanted was to nurture, to care, to raise a family, but not in the male way. It wasn't a desire to be a father. It was a desire to have a family, to do stuff that as a male, you just can't do, which sort of has evolved into a career of being involved with ambulance, being involved with nursing, being involved with supporting people with learning disabilities, aged care, palliative care, like really interested in all that stuff.
Well, and not to mention, you have a big passion for helping educate parents and raising healthy, happy children.
Well, the common thread through the whole thing was a fascination with why the aggression and the violence that was inherent in the community when I was growing up was there. So I'm almost fascinated by that interplay of what is violence, how does it happen, and as a follower of the goddess, why it's so anathema to me. So I did a lot of work with groups, with street kids, with abused women, working in communities, trying to help stop violence. And by the mid-90s, I was really starting to get frustrated because we kept doing programs with teenagers and adults and men and women, and we did social interventions and we did psychological interventions. And in the long term, it just felt to me like we weren't making a difference. Like, what is it that makes a difference? So I walked away from the Christian mission team that I was with, and went back to uni. I was studying public health, and I met this wonderful lady called Patricia Easthill, and her PhD was on women who killed to protect themselves and their family from abuse. So I started reading her stuff while I was doing the public health. And I got more fascinated. And then there was a couple of lecturers who were women who are interested in families and how families work. And in all of that, I was studying epidemiology, which is the science of what causes things, basically. So how did we end up here with arthritis from there when we were perfectly healthy? And I started to realize that sort of there's all these commonalities from all these different diseases, behavioral disorders, social problems, psychological problems that in effect were just symptoms of how we were raised as children. And that seems crazy to say that a 60-year-old has this disorder because of how mum was eating when she was pregnant, but it's true, like the science actually supports that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, and you can see it. You can see how, a little seed is planted when we're young, we're in the womb or we're
yeah,
young children, and then it's like a cycle or a pattern is like developed throughout our life.
mm,
So you can see that thread that goes
yeah,
through.
yeah. Um, so in this process, I was getting a stronger and stronger sense of um, the mother or the goddess. Although I didn't really talk about it at that stage because it's sort of, for me, the goddess is um, cleaning dirty nappies, it's preparing food, it's Patricia Eastill's work, it's killing to protect your family. Um, so for me, there's nothing woo woo about the goddess. Like
Mm-hmm.
she's a mother. She's a killer to protect her children. She does.
She's not the glamorous goddess that we sometimes
Yeah,
imagine, like
yeah,
Venus or Aphrodite.
yeah. So the women who have had the biggest influence on me would not call themselves feminists.
Mm-hmm.
Would not probably in a sense really even understand feminism because it's feminism would exclude them because they believe all sorts of things that
Yeah.
aren't woo woo enough, aren't glamorous enough. It's um, it's a woman with cancer who keeps going to work to bring another paycheck in to feed her kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's a,
It's the realities of daily life.
yeah, yeah, and that's not compatible with a lot of what society teaches, and sadly, that's not compatible with a lot of what people think that the goddess and feminism is about. Um,
Well, that's part of life that we try to avoid or hide or keep, like, we don't want people to see because of pride or
mm,
shame or these feelings that oh well you need to look or be a certain way,
yeah,
and then it's like we try to hide those parts of ourselves,
yeah,
those really vulnerable parts.
yeah. So it's for me there was this growing sense of the goddess in my life as a distinct person, and being able to identify her voice much more clearly when she was talking to me, um, and a realization that most of the ills in society are coming out of early childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I started getting more interested in that. It's like early childhood. Where does early childhood come from? And there was also a growing sense at the same time that we're betraying socially, we're betraying our families because it's 100 years ago when you started a family, you were surrounded by your aunties, your older sisters, women the same age who were just starting their own families, um, the local midwife who knew all about childbirth and stuff. Um, and there was usually a woman at the edge of the village who didn't quite fit in, but she was the one who knew everything about herbs and food and stuff. And if there was any problems or an infection, you went to her.
Mm-hmm.
So family is in fact a group of women, sister mothers, aunts, nieces, in a community. And if you look in nature, that's how families work. And they're surrounded by males. And the males protect that community, but the women are the core of families, and they're supporting each other. And with changes in society, we've got to this place where women are migrating away from their families. We don't have any social structures that help them build community. So a young mum is fairly isolated from knowledge. Young mums often don't have experience in skills of raising family, of food preparation, of simple hygiene, of stuff like that. So it's sort of evolved into my way of honouring the goddess is to get that we need to recreate a system that supports motherhood, that supports nurture by bringing skills and knowledge back into the family. And interestingly enough, science would tell us that's also how you get rid of most cancers. That's how you get rid of arthritis, type 2 diabetes, obesity, ADD, ADHD, oppositional disorders. If kids are well fed, if they're getting good quality sleep, if they've got a strong positive attachment with their mother and their father, like I don't want to sound unbalanced, because like kids need, sort of masculinity and femininity, although that word has a flavour I don't really like, but
they need the yin and the yang.
Yeah, they need the yin and the yang. Thank you. That's a great way of saying it. So we need to start building this back into community, and that will get rid of our jails. It will get rid of most of our hospitals. It will get rid of social problems. It'll get rid of violence, because kids just want to feel safe, healthy, happy. And that all comes down to sort of skills and knowledge of early childhood parenting. In fact, before early childhood parenting, we should be teaching our daughters how to maintain their bodies so that if they want to have children, they can have children without problems. This thing of medical fertility clinics where you go because you can't get pregnant, I find really problematic, because science tells us that most of those fertility issues come from lifestyle and nutrition. But we're not teaching people about lifestyle and nutrition. We're charging them $20,000 for in vitro fertilization. Whereas if they just got enough sleep and felt less anxious, everything would happen the way it's supposed to happen. So it's sort of like, so there's this sort of thing about how do I honour the goddess in my day-to-day life, and that's really about finding all that great science knowledge, all that great information, and bringing it back to the people who most need it, bringing it back to sort of young mums, young families, young fathers. So it's sort of it all sort of fits together like a rope, but sort of the individual threads sometimes seem a little disparate, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no. And, we're talking about children kind of in this conversation, but I want to point out that to really connect to our intuition and connect with the goddess, however she is going to present herself to us, that we really have to be taking care of ourselves. And you talk about sleep hygiene, And one of the big things that I was really fascinated by when we were talking was the nutrition piece and how so many things, including a lot of mental health, can be healed in a sense with healthy, proper nutrition.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a little. That's a hobby horse I try and sort of keep in a stable because it's
Well,
one of the things that drives me nuts, and it's like I'm really strong about this. Is if you read through the DSM, like, and that's the big book of all the psychiatric disorders, almost all of the symptoms of psychiatric disorders are also listed in nutrition and dietetic research as symptoms of food allergies, food intolerances, nutritional toxicities, and nutritional deficiencies.
mm-hmm.
But instead of sending a family to a dietitian because a child is having a problem, they go to a GP and get put on Ritalin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no.
Here he gets going.
Yeah, I don't want to sound negative about psychiatrists and psychologists in medicine, but if the underlying issue is that a child has not got enough magnesium in their diet, or they've got too much copper in their diet, or they're deficient in vitamin B6, then no amount of psychiatric or psychological interventions is going to make a difference.
Right.
The child needs proper nutrition.
Yes.
So I'll get off my hobby horse there because it's.
So I'm going to actually pause you here,
yeah,
because we're going to ride this hobby horse into the sunset for members, because this is where I'm going to let you like totally, just like I said,
crazy.
Get on this, because I think this is really valuable information. And, if you are experiencing headaches, fatigue, stuffy nose,
obesity, flatulence,
Yes.
diarrhea, constipation, like they're all.
If you are experiencing anything other than brilliance and aliveness and free,
But that's who the goddess is. Like, if the goddess is in our lives, and I get all about this, like very passionate. If the goddess is actually in your life and you're in touch with her, and you're actually listening to what she's saying to you, you'll be experiencing health. You'll be experiencing happiness. You'll be experiencing abundance. But somehow it's been twisted slightly, and one of the things that sort of worries me a lot about people talking about being goddess followers is that their life isn't happy, healthy, abundant,
right.
Which sort of sometimes makes me wonder if I'm actually deceiving myself and I'm not talking to the same goddess that other people are talking about, because it's like.
Well, sometimes we bypass things like the basic things because we've got this idea, the ideal, let's, So, so for Awakened Goddess members, community members of the show, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to dive in really deep and go down the rabbit hole in terms of nutrition and how to really live from a much more healthy, grounded place so we can connect even deeper with the goddess. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Awakened Goddess Show. I hope you enjoyed today's guest and got something you can start using in your life right away. For more spiritual insights and to listen to more episodes, subscribe to The Awakened Goddess Show at theawakenedgoddess.com and discover wisdom that'll change your life.